mentioned there's some anxiety, for families who have kids or teachers going back to school. There's also some anxiety that's relieved by going back to school too. Anybody know what I'm talking about? When the kids are home for the summertime. So our boys, they love to play and roughhouse, and they can't really go outside when it's 110 outside. So we have this indoor basketball hoop that's in this hallway. It attaches to one of their bedroom doors, and they can play basketball in the hallway. It's kind of awkward, but there's enough room that they can make it happen. But anyway, I'm used to hearing, every day during the summertime, the ball bouncing off the hoop, and, they're laughing and giggling. A couple weeks ago, actually just right before school started here, I heard them playing. The ball was bouncing off the rim, just kind of normal sounds, and all of a sudden it got really quiet. How many of you realize that's a warning sign when it gets really quiet? And I walked into the hallway, and they both had these, scared expressions on their faces, looking at a place in the drywall. And I looked down, and there was a butt-sized hole in our drywall where one of them apparently got boxed out, was going for a dunk or 360 or whatever, and put his bum right through the drywall. And so that's on the list to get fixed. And our oldest guy, he put a sign over the drywall, just a normal piece of paper, and it says, "Do not touch." He thought that would be helpful. Like, okay, great. That works for now. But so there is some anxiety, with summertime as well. But we're praying for everybody who's going back to school. Now, this is the second week of our series, United States of Anxiety, and we are living in an age of American anxiety, and we need hope. With the uncertainty of this fall, combined with the stress of everyday life, just normal everyday life, we are unsure of what the future may bring, and we all have weights of anxiety that we carry with us. I would imagine for many of you, perhaps, the events of the past couple of weeks probably have lowered your anxiety a little bit. I would suggest that we're not out of the woods yet, and we don't want to carry anxiety, but we do want to be engaged and plugged in. But as Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, we are not going to wallow in the valley of despair. We all know that we face anxiety, things that put stress on us. We don't want to dwell on that in this series. What we do want to do in this series is to explore ways that we could learn from the Scripture, learn from our relationship with God to relieve anxiety, to experience more peace, more hope, and maybe take action, being spurred on by anxiety in a positive way, harnessing that and taking action that will benefit us all. And today we're talking about how to handle anxiety when you feel helpless. You might feel anxiety about the election, and you think, who am I to make a difference? I'm just one person. How much does my vote really count? What could I really do? Or there could be areas in your life like finances where you feel like you're helpless. There are some things that you feel like are out of your control. Maybe you're having a hard time financially for various reasons, and that can really push buttons in our survival instinct. And we feel threatened, and maybe you feel helpless there. You can feel helpless in a health concern. Maybe you've gotten a diagnosis, or you were injured recently, and you're feeling like just things are out of control. You feel like you're helpless in some way. Maybe it's a work situation, stress about a boss or a job that you're not really happy in, and you feel helpless there. Like, what can I do? Maybe you feel trapped in that situation. Maybe you feel helpless with some family members and the way that they conduct themselves. Maybe it is around politics, or maybe it's just the stuff of everyday life where there are marriage issues or issues with your adult children, and you wish that you could make them act a certain way or make better decisions, and you just feel helpless at times having an influence on them. So how do we handle that when we feel like, or at least we're tempted to feel like we're helpless? That's where we're headed today, and the last half of this series is going to specifically address some of those things. So I'm putting the schedule up on the screen here. Today, we're talking about what to do when you feel helpless, and then next week, I'll wrap up my portion of the series with moving from anxiety to hope, and then we're going to talk about specifically finances when Jeremy Jernigan speaks, and then on September 1st, dealing constructively with anxiety over nationalism and maybe sexuality and culture war stress, and then on September 8th, Carrie Wester is going to wrap it up with coping with anxiety from strained relationships. And that can look like all kinds of situations. So we are going to specifically talk about those kinds of anxiety more during the series. But today, in general, if you are tempted to feel helpless and you feel anxiety, how can we cope with that? Are there steps that we can take? So if you were here last week, we said last week that the book of Daniel is set during the Babylonian, help me out, Babylonian, do you remember? Exile, the Babylonian exile, around 587 BC. But then there's this strange thing that Bible scholars believe about the book of Daniel, that the actual final authorship or the compilation of Daniel was 400 years later in the 160s BC. So set in the 580s BC, but actually completed as a book 400 years later in the 160s BC. And we showed this timeline last week. That's a big gap, a 400-year gap. Well, today we're going to focus a little bit more on the setting of Daniel. So the setting of Daniel in the Babylonian exile was when King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, conquered Judah, which is what is now southern Israel. It's where Jerusalem is. He killed perhaps thousands, ransacked the temple. This was the center of their life, and there were a lot of riches of the country in the temple, and stole those from the Jerusalem temple. So he took their wealth. And then he took some people back to Babylon as exiles, including Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. As I said last week, my dictation software on my phone dictated Smackdown and Indigo, but he took them back to Babylon as slaves. And Daniel is only 12 chapters long, but the word wise appears in Daniel 17 times. One of the main themes of the book of Daniel is what it means to be wise, to have wisdom, especially what it means to have wisdom in difficult times when you might be tempted to feel helpless. So in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that disturbs him. And dictators are always paranoid. They're always scheming, and they're always thinking people are out to get them. So he has this dream that disturbs him, and he calls the wise men of Babylon. These are sorcerers, astrologers. These are his national advisors. And he wants guidance from them about what the meaning of his dream could be. But he's like, if I just ask them what my dream meant, if I tell them and interpret this for me, that would be too easy. So he decides he wants the wise men of Babylon first to tell him what his dream was, and then to tell them what it means. So it's like a dictator asking, what number am I thinking? And they're supposed to come up with the right answer. And he tells them, he threatens them, that if you can't tell me what my dream was and what it meant, then I'm going to have you executed, which is a very dictator thing to do. And so the wise men of Babylon are like, O king, your highness, we can't, it's like a line from, you're asking me to do something I can't do. We can't do that, king. We don't have the ability to tell you what your dream was. We could maybe interpret it for you, but you're asking us to do something that we're not able to do. And he threatened all of the wise people of Babylon with death. And again, typical paranoid dictator, always threatening to kill people. Kim Jong-un would be like, well played, Nebuchadnezzar. Your dictator game is on point. Putin would be impressed. This is just the way that dictators function. They're paranoid. They make unreasonable demands. There are people who think they're on their side, but whose side is a dictator really on? Their own side. And they're just looking to kill people and punish people and just have their way all of the time. Well, Daniel was included now in the wise men of Babylon. And so Daniel went back to his friends and he asked them to pray. And that night, the book of Daniel says that Daniel had this visionary experience from God, and God told him what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was, first of all, and then the meaning of his dream. So what was impossible for the Babylonian wise men, God miraculously gives to Daniel out of a response to Daniel's faith. And God tells him what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was, and then the meaning of that dream. And then once that happens, and this is before Daniel even tells Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel has this song or poem or hymn of praise to God that's included in the book of Daniel. And whenever you see these in the Bible, it's an indicator that what you're about to read is really important. Because these hymns of praise or songs or poems, they basically introduce the themes of the book. Like we have the Magnificat, Mary's song in Luke, and that sets up the theme of Luke, and we have Paul using this in Philippians to talk about who Jesus is, and it's just a literary device in the Hebrew mindset. This is going to be really important, so pay attention to what is said in this song, and so we're going to read that together. That's our scripture for today. Daniel chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his." Okay, wisdom and power belong to God. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Now again, remember that's the setting of Daniel when this takes place, but the authorship of Daniel seems to be 400 years later when Antiochus Epiphanes, if you were here last week, is a sociopathic dictator who has conquered Judah, the same region that was conquered by the Babylonians only 400 years later. And he's using religion to divide the people. He paid off the high priest, and he changed the temple worship to worship the Greek god Zeus instead of the Hebrew god Yahweh. And he's creating a civil war in Judah using religion, starting with religion, but he's dividing the society. He's using a divide and conquer strategy. And he wants people to view him as a savior. Antiochus Epiphanes is what he wanted to be called. Epiphanes means God manifests. So he wanted people to think that he was kind of Zeus in the flesh. That people would worship him as this dictator who is dividing society and creating a religious civil war. But he's really a tyrant. He's a murderous dictator like Nebuchadnezzar and like every other dictator. And there were people who were thinking people in Judah at that time in the 160s looking around and thinking, how in the world are people following Antiochus? He said, this isn't our religion. He's changed our religion. He's set up another altar to Zeus. He sacrificed a pig. This isn't who we are. But there are people who are following him. How in the world is this happening? Isn't it nice that never happens here in the United States of America, that we never have thoughts like that? But this is what the people of Judah were going through in the 160s BC. And so, like we said last week, the purpose of the book of Daniel is for all the people who are thinking those thoughts to be able to think, when did this happen before? How did we make it through this? Oh, yeah, the Babylonian exile. In the book of Daniel, based probably partly on oral tradition passed down, and then we don't know where some of the literature came from. The languages changed in the writing of Daniel from Hebrew to Aramaic and back to Hebrew, and there's a lot of interesting things there. But the story of Daniel helped them make sense of what was happening when Antiochus Epiphanes was dividing society and causing people to think, what in the world? Like, how can people fall for this? And it gave them a roadmap for defeating him. Now, let's just go out on a limb and say that you've thought this from time to time, that you can identify with these people of Judah, and you are greatly disturbed by what is happening in the United States. And you're like, I don't understand how people support this person. How is this happening? I want you to go back now to Daniel 2. We still have, could we go back one slide, Susie? And with those feelings, thank you, with those feelings that you have about how could people do this? How can people support this person? And man, what's the future hold? What's this person trying to do? And we're trying to figure out all the schemes. And is there going to be like election shenanigans? And what's going on here? Let's read Daniel 2 in the light of how we feel. Praise to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power belong to God. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings. There are people who think they're the most powerful people on the planet. And Daniel told the people of Judah when they were being violently tortured and divided, and was all kinds of anxiety being produced. God deposes kings. God's able to depose kings and raise up others. God gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. Are you wondering, what schemes are we going to have to make it through this time? What lies are going to be told? What denial is going to be put out there in society? And what interference with elections? What are we going to have to put up with? God reveals deep and hidden things. Let's go on to the next slide here. He knows what lies in darkness. Dictators are always scheming. They're always plotting, and coming up with all kinds of, illegal and inhumane schemes. The people of Judah who were being harassed by Antiochus could read Daniel 2. God knows what lies in darkness. God knows. Light dwells in him. Everything that happens in darkness will eventually be dragged out into the light. And Daniel says, I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You've given me wisdom and power. You've made known to me what we asked of you. You've made known to us the dream of the dictator. You've made known. And so this was comforting. Do you feel that? In a confusing time, when you'll look around, you'll be like, man, how do people fall for this? And you're thinking, okay, now what are we going to have to go through? What does this fall hold? What does this winter hold? And you read the words of Daniel. God deposes kings. He knows the deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness. And you can see how this was comforting to the people who were being divided and tortured by Antiochus Epiphanes. The story of Daniel helped them make sense of what this dictator was doing and how they could defeat him. So if you're feeling anxious about this fall, wisdom and power belong to God. And he can give that same wisdom and power to you and to me. So Webster defines wisdom or wise as marked by deep understanding, keen discernment, and a capacity for sound judgment. That's a really detailed, great definition. Here's the Ryan Gear definition. Wise people can look around and understand what the heck is going on. That's what wisdom means. Wise people can look around and understand, here's what's happening. Whether it's national politics, whether it's in your own life, that situation that tempts you to feel helpless. Wise people, wisdom is the ability to look around and understand what is going on. This from experience and knowledge and maybe guidance from others and my spiritual sources of wisdom and my friendships, I can look around and I can understand what is going on. So if you're tempted to feel helpless, first of all, wisdom is the ability to look around and understand what's going on. So I remember, I think, it's a little blurry, but I think I remember the first time that somebody said to me what we've all thought and said many times by now. How can so many Christian people support this person or support this thing? How can they not see what is going on? According to my best memory, it was the summer of 2015, and I believe it was Aaron Stritzel, who many of you know, and he gives video sermons here sometimes. He's a pastor in Colorado, and he was working with me as our associate pastor at that time, and we met up and we were talking, and he's like, man, this stuff that's going on, the birtherism. Do you remember birtherism? And then the comments about, Mexicans coming to the United States and rapists and drug dealers, and he's like, whoa. He's like, we've seen this script before. We've seen it in America, unfortunately, but we've seen it in other countries. We had world wars over this. So he's going back to his knowledge of history, what's happened in the past. And I just remember, according to my best memory, it was him. The first time somebody said to me, man, how could so many Christians support this? How could they not see this? It was alarming, and it was a new level that we had not seen, at least we in our generation had not seen. And so Aaron had the wisdom to look around and understand what was going on. We've seen this before. We know how this plays out. Having the knowledge and the experience to know what is happening right now and where it could lead. Now, if we're able to look around and see what is going on, and once again, it may be your own situation, whatever it is that tempts you to feel helpless, then we can do something about it. So 4 years ago, in the fall of 2020, during COVID, and facing the election of 2020, I gave a sermon series called Distressed. And if you're interested, you could go back on our YouTube channel and you could watch that. And one of those messages, I referenced an essay that was written in the 1970s by an economic historian. I guess that's actually a job. It sounds pretty cool. It sounds like you have to be pretty intelligent to do that job. But an economic historian named Carlos Cipolla. And this essay quickly became famous to help people, at least give people a framework, perhaps for how to understand what goes on, yes, nationally, and sometimes in our personal lives as well. And when I shared this information, I got as much or more positive feedback than I've ever gotten from a sermon. Like, there were several people who were like, man, that was really helpful to me, and I found it helpful to me too. That's why I shared it. And so I'm going to share that with you today. It's just going to take a few minutes. And we're going to talk about what it means to be one of the wise ones. And if you are tempted to feel helpless, why maybe that's not the case. And it's so important for you to know that that's not the case. So there's been a lot of name calling over the past few years. I don't want to engage in name calling. Disagreeing with us doesn't make somebody stupid. However, there are a lot of people who have acted foolishly over the past few years, and we've seen just a lot of episodes that cause us to scratch our heads. And in the 1970s, Carlos Cipolla wrote an essay entitled "The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity." And it was meant to be funny in some ways. We wish it was all funny, but he said some things in this essay that were really helpful to a lot of people. And it's not because you want to call people names, but it's the action step at the end of the essay that really carries value. And that's why I want to share it today. So the S word is a word we don't use in our house. We don't say stupid in the Gear household because it's not a nice word. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to use biblical words as we talk about his essay. And there are people who actually translate this into the basic laws of human foolishness. So we're going to use biblical words like wise and foolish. And when I read Cipolla's essay, I immediately thought of the book of Proverbs. They won't be on the screen, but just to give you some ideas of Proverbs and how they view wisdom and people who act foolishly. Proverbs 132 says, "For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them." Proverbs 10:14, "The wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin." Proverbs 14:7 says, "Stay away from a fool, for you will not find knowledge on their lips." So this is ancient literature of people trying to navigate their way through society. This has nothing to do with IQ. A person could be cognitively delayed and still be wise in this model. So it has nothing to do with whether a person's a genius or how smart they are. Right, but this is the way that Cipolla saw society working as far as wisdom and foolishness and those who feel helpless. So I'm going to show you a model of how he viewed society, and there are 4 quadrants. Let's take a look. All right, so on the top left, Cipolla said there are people in society who believe they are helpless. And to flesh this out a little bit, people who believe they're helpless, they don't really stick up for their own rights, right? They let other people get what they want, but they don't get what they want. So helpless people will allow themselves to be walked on. They don't get what they want, but they help other people get what they want. Does that make sense? So it's not a win-win. It's like other people win and helpless people lose because they're not sticking up for themselves. They're not speaking up. Maybe they're not engaged, but they just kind of let people trample on them and treat them however they want. Or those are people who Sapola called the helpless. They just don't stick up for their rights, okay? Then in quadrant 2, moving this way, the upper right, you have the wise. And Sapola said, wise people are always working for a win-win. They want to help other people get what they want and need in life, and wise people also want to have their own needs met. So these are people who are looking for both parties to win, right? A win-win situation. Other people get what they need and want, and wise people also speak up and make their needs and their wants known, and they can get what they want as well. And then in quadrant 3, moving down, you have bandits, or they could also be called con men. Bandits, Sapola said, get their own needs met by hurting other people. It's easy to see. Con men, they're liars. They take advantage of other people. They're always pulling some kind of scheme. They lie with impunity. It's all about them. There's like the kind of narcissism. They hurt other people to get what they want. Those are bandits. And then in quadrant 4, finally, you have the foolish. Now, this is, there are funny parts of the essay, but then it's also kind of a sober warning. Sapola says, foolish people hurt other people, and they also don't get what they want. There is no rationality behind their actions. They're just acting foolishly. Like a bandit, you can predict. Like, okay, they're lying. Like if you're somewhat wise, you can usually pick up on a con. Oh, they're trying to enrich themselves by lying and taking advantage of other people. Okay, I get it. That makes rational sense. Sapola says with people who are acting foolishly, it doesn't make any sense. They're just hurting people, and then they're being hurt themselves. And so there are people who would look around and think, I don't understand how this person could do this or act this way. And Sapola says that's precisely what makes foolish people so dangerous, is because there's nothing to understand. There is no rational motive for how they're acting. They're just acting out foolishly. And it's so dangerous because it catches you by surprise and you don't know how to deal with it because it doesn't make any sense to you. You just don't have a hook to hang that on. And so we're befuddled and shocked and stressed out by people who act foolishly. They create all kinds of anxiety because we just don't know what they're going to do because there's just no rationality behind it. So I'm sure you could think of a few examples on your own, but a few examples during COVID. You remember stories of people who they wouldn't wear a mask and then they would like walk up to a cashier and cough in their face. You remember stories like that? You're like, I'd rather not, or on an airplane. There are people who would act out in those kinds of ways. There are people who believe wild conspiracy theories. QAnon was a label for this collection of conspiracy theories that just like, wow, that is way out there. People who just displayed a lack of critical thinking skills and seemed to fall for propaganda and then would call other people sheep. And they would just believe bald-faced lies. And there were a lot of people acting foolishly during that time, and Sapola would say that's true of every time throughout the history of human civilization. And again, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to be funny in some ways, but part of our anxiety right now is coming from trying to understand why somebody would believe such foolish things, or why they would be fooled, why they might fall for the con. What is the clear con of a bandit? And a lot of anxiety and the temptation to feel helpless can come from the fact that we don't understand why people would act that way. And here's what Sapola has to say about that. Again, it won't be on the screen. I just want you to see the quadrant. I'm going to read a little bit from his essay. Sapola writes, foolish people are dangerous and damaging because reasonable people find it difficult to understand unreasonable behavior. A wise person may understand the logic of a bandit. The bandit's actions follow a pattern of rationality, nasty rationality if you like, but still rationality. The bandit wants a plus on his account. Since he is not wise enough to devise ways of obtaining the plus, as well as providing you with the plus, he will produce his plus by causing a minus to appear on your account. All this is bad, but it is rational. And if you are rational, then you can predict it. You can foresee a bandit's actions, his nasty maneuvers and ugly aspirations, and often can build up your defenses. Reminds me of Daniel saying, "You've given us wisdom and power. You show us the hidden things." Sapola then writes, "But with a foolish person, all this is absolutely impossible, as explained by these laws. A foolish person will harass you for no reason, for no advantage, without any plan or scheme, in the most improbable times and places. You have no rational way of telling if and when and how and why the foolish person attacks." Again, he's trying to be funny, but you think some of the Thanksgiving dinners you've had, probably. "When confronted with a foolish individual, you are completely at his mercy, because the foolish person's actions do not conform to the rules of rationality." So one is generally caught by surprise by the attack. Even when one becomes aware of the attack, one cannot organize a rational defense because the attack itself lacks any rational structure. And so Sapola, along with the book of Proverbs, would suggest that being around foolish people is dangerous and will lead to anxiety and sadness on your part. Now, let me press pause there. That doesn't mean that people can never change their minds. It doesn't mean when people disagree with us, that means they're stupid or foolish. There are people, and we're not right about everything, even if we would like to think we are. There's part of basic human humbleness to admit that we're not. But what he's saying here is, if you are trying to make foolish people act in ways that aren't foolish, you're going to feel pretty helpless. You're going to feel a lot of anxiety trying to do that. That's not really, in the book of Proverbs, I think would probably agree, that's not really the tactic that you want to take. Let me read the ending of his essay, and then it's going to become clear why this is so important for us if you feel helpless. Sapola wrote, "In a country which is moving downhill, the fraction of foolish people remains constant. However, in the remaining population, one notices among those in power an alarming proliferation of the bandits, with overtones of foolishness, and among those not in power, an equally alarming growth in the number of helpless individuals. Such change in the composition of the non-foolish population inevitably strengthens the destructive power of the foolish and makes decline a certainty." And this is how he ends his essay, "And the country goes to hell." Sapola's words, not mine. Here's what he's saying. At all times and all places, and again, this is partly tongue-in-cheek, right? We're not trying to be mean and call people names here, but it could be helpful, and you're going to see why in a second. At all times and places, the number of foolish people remains the same. He said in countries which are really going through a hard time, that may be declining, some would say. I don't believe that's the case with ours. I think our best days are ahead, but it may feel like it at times. He said, if it feels like your country is declining, it's because there is an alarming proliferation of the bandits in power. People who are con men. People who hurt other people to enrich themselves. And he says the inverse of that is there are too many people in society who view themselves as helpless. And because they believe they're helpless, they're disengaged. They think they don't have any power. And so the bandit has his way. Because there are not enough helpless people moving over into the wise quadrant to vote these bandits out of power. And so here's what Sapola would say. Wise people, if you're tempted to feel helpless, wise people must convince helpless people that they're not really helpless. That's the key. It's not to call people names or foolish or anything like that. That's the value of this model. That the task of wise people, if you're able to look around and you see what's going on, maybe it is nationally, your task is to talk to helpless people, people who believe they're helpless, and to help them to understand that they're not helpless, to get engaged, to get in the game. That's what keeps bandits out of power. Helpless people have the ability to move into the wise quadrant. And the number of foolish people can stay the same, and they're gonna do foolish things. But that doesn't mean that bandits need to be in power. Wise people can help helpless people to understand that they're not really helpless. And we can band together. And we can send the bandits out so that wise people can determine the future of the country. That's every Get Out the Vote campaign you've ever seen, is trying to engage people who think they're helpless and get them into the game. Daniel 2:23 says, "You have given me wisdom and power." That song there in Daniel is meant to be a message for every single one of us, every single person in Judah, in the 160s under Antiochus Epiphanes, and every single one of us now, and in any generation. God has given you wisdom and power. You are not helpless. You are not helpless. That's the good news. Whether it's politics or whether it's things in your own personal life, you are not helpless. God has given you wisdom and power, and I understand you may have been beaten down by your circumstances, where any hope has been beaten out of you, and you feel like it's all you can do to just pick yourself up, out of bed in the morning and put one foot in front of the other. I know there can be situations like that, and we can get lulled into it over time to where we feel helpless. But I want to share something with you. A few years ago, this has happened lots of times actually, but a few years ago, I specifically remember somebody came to me who was having trouble in their marriage, and they asked me to refer them to a marriage counselor. And so I gave them a referral, a name that I knew of somebody who could do a good job, and then a couple weeks later, I saw them in the service and remembered to ask, hey, did you contact the counselor, or did you go? How's it going? And the person said, well, it really stinks that my spouse refuses to go. They said they're not going to go to counseling, and I just feel helpless. Like, what am I supposed to do? I had high hopes that they would go with me and that we could make this work, and now I don't know what to do. And you could tell they're kind of throwing up their hands, understandably tempted to feel helpless. And what I shared with them is some amazingly good news. No matter what it is that you feel anxiety about or that tempts you to feel helpless, whether it's politics or things in your own personal life, and amazingly good news. It's called family systems therapy. And the theory of family systems therapy is this, that let's say it's a family of 4, it doesn't matter, or it could be a friend group, or it could be a church, and I don't know what's going on with those lights over there, but we just roll with it, right? In portable church. In family systems therapy, the idea is that any system, all right, is just a collection of parts, all right? So if you have a family of 4, all 4 people in the family are a part, and they together make up the system. And every part functions in a certain way, and collectively, all of those parts together make the system what it is. The system, the situation, whatever it is, functions the way it does because each member, each part of that system currently plays their part. They play their role that make the system what it is. Does that make sense? So everything that's going on is made up by the individuals who are a part of that. And I shared with that person, family systems therapy has proven that if one person goes to counseling, the entire system must change. And they're like, what? I could tell they didn't quite believe me. And I said, no, all systems are made up by their parts. And your marriage functions the way it does because of the role you play as well. And I'm not saying you're bad or you've done anything wrong, but we all play a role in the way things are. And family systems therapy says if one person will go to counseling, the entire family system, it's not just might change or could change. The entire family system must change. It has no choice because one of the parts of that system has changed. It's functioning differently now, and so the entire system must change. And so I shared, I know that might sound like a pep talk in some ways. It's important to say you may not get the results you want. We can't control other people. We can't make them act in certain ways. We wish we could, but we can't. But what we can do is we can control what we do. And if you change, that entire system must change. It cannot remain the same. So if you have a spouse who is domineering, for example, a domineering spouse, and then one who thinks they're helpless, and they just kind of take it. They put up with it. And maybe it's been that way for years. And the person who has believed they're helpless, and they just take it and put up with it, they finally decide they've had enough. And like, we need to go to counseling. And the domineering person is like, why? And they see no reason. And the person who previously thought they were helpless, they go to counseling. What are they going to learn? You have dignity and worth. You have rights as a person. You don't deserve for somebody to be domineering toward you and suppressing you and putting you down all the time. And they're going to begin to believe that, the truth. And they're going to realize they're not helpless. And they're going to go back to that marriage maybe after a few months of counseling as a wise person. And the domineering person is going to do the same thing that they've always done. But something's changed. One of the parts of that system has changed. And says, I'm not going to let you talk to me that way anymore. I'm not going to put up with it. Now, the domineering person might become abusive, and at that point, you and the kids get out. It's also possible that the domineering person finally sees the light. Okay, well, maybe things do need to change. That's what happens. That's what family systems therapy says. When one person is willing to change, when they realize they're not helpless after all, and they get into the wise quadrant, if one part changes, the entire system must change. So it's not that you're not helpless. No, you're not helpless. No, that's not the case. You are somebody with immense power to do something. Whether it's our national situation, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a job situation, whether it's friends, whatever it is, we can't control other people. But you have immense power, actually, to do something. Because when you change, the system must change. Daniel said, I thank you, God, that you have given me wisdom and power, the ability to look around and realize what's going on, and the power to do something about that. That may be one person, maybe it is your marriage, maybe it's a job situation, maybe it's the national situation, whatever it is. But there's this quote by Margaret Mead. When you think you're not enough, or there aren't enough of us, or what can I do, what difference can I make? The anthropologist Margaret Mead is famous for saying, never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. That's how all change takes place. When one small part of the system changes. Whether it is a spouse saying, I'm not going to let you treat me that way anymore. Or whether it's, a parent saying to an adult child, like, I'm not going to enable you anymore. Or saying to a boss, I think I need to pursue other opportunities. Whatever it is, when that one person or that small group of people realizes we're not helpless, the system must change. And somebody says, I have a dream. And all of a sudden, things change. Somebody says, I have an idea. Someone says, somebody ought to do something about that. And then they realize that somebody is them. Someone says, our marriage can't stay the way it is. Somebody says, I can't keep working in this toxic environment. Somebody says, I can't keep living with this financial stress. And they take steps to get healthier. That's how all change happens. So not only are you not helpless, but when you change, everything around you must change. Like Daniel, God has given you wisdom and power to act on your environment, and it must change in response when you change. Now, Little action point here, and then I'm going to close the sermon. For some of you, an action step, if you're concerned about what's going on socially or around us, it might be to plug in to a group of people who are making a difference. And maybe something you could do if you feel helpless, and what could I do to make a difference? Well, you can get plugged in with a community of people. Catalyst is our missions ministry here. They just met this morning, actually. They meet the second Sunday of every month before the worship service, and they are leading our mission strategy as a church, coming up with ideas. How are we going to make a difference in our community and internationally? And they're going to create all kinds of opportunities for us to serve and make a difference. They made a quick, 1-minute promotional video that I want to show you, and then I'll tell you a quick story before we close. Let's watch this Catalyst video. There's some great opportunities there to make a difference. What can I do? Well, lots of things. Never underestimate the ability of a small group of people to change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever has. So our leader, Callie, is going to be out at a table here right after the service. You can stop by the table for Catalyst and get some information about how you could be involved. And I want to close with this. Who's been watching the Olympics? Has it been fun, right, to see the men's team? Like, they pulled out some squeakers, the basketball. And got the gold medal and so on. Just a lot of cool things. Katie Ledecky has become the most decorated female athlete in U.S. history. She has 14 medals and added 2 more golds this summer in USA Swimming. And I didn't really know this about Katie Ledecky. I just learned it recently, and it made her story more inspiring. Especially if you're tempted to feel helpless in some ways and know God has given you wisdom and power, but just a real-life example of what this could look like. So she wrote in her autobiography that she has a health condition called POTS, or P-O-T-S, and I'm going to try to pronounce it, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I probably butchered that, but it's a disorder of the nervous system that controls body functions like blood pressure and heart rate. You're like, wow, Olympic athlete. Okay, how does this work in her life? And the symptoms occur when you change position. Like if you're sitting down and you stand up, or you're laying down and you stand up. And in her case, she wrote that her body will pool blood in the vessels below her heart when she stands up. And then her body will somehow sense that and releases epinephrine, which adds stressors to the heart, like adrenaline, which stresses the heart even more. It makes it beat faster, which brings on dizziness and fainting and exhaustion. Like, how in the world would that happen with, an Olympic athlete? And so this is a condition that she has lived with for years. And you can see how that could tempt somebody to feel helpless. What can I do about this? Now, she began swimming before she developed this disease, but I want you to see how she views this. That's the takeaway here. What is her view of being an Olympic athlete having this disease? This is her talking. So it turns out that swimming is one of the best activities with people with POTS. Swimming strengthens your heart, which also helps with POTS. And the water is like this giant compression sleeve on your body that helps your circulation. That's what she's saying about this. So you're already getting the idea, like, wow, she's like turning this into a positive. And then this is what she wrote in her autobiography. It isn't too much of a burden, and it keeps me even more tuned into my health, which as I age in the sport is only a positive thing. And she's already hoping that the Olympics in LA in 2028 are in the cards. And so you've got an Olympic athlete dealing with this disease that would be difficult for anybody, but her attitude toward it, and I'm not saying this is easy, okay? Easier said than done. But her attitude toward it is, you know what? Swimming's good for me anyway. Swimming's good when you have this. And this makes me monitor my health. Makes me drink lots of water and makes me stay attuned to my health. And that's her attitude toward this disease as an Olympic athlete. I'm sure there are times when she was tempted to feel helpless, perhaps, but that's not what she's chosen. She's chosen to see this in any way possible as, here's what I can do. To view this situation in a way that doesn't increase my anxiety, that doesn't make me feel helpless and powerless. And she's made a choice, even as an Olympic athlete with this disease, to view it in some positive way that can help her. Daniel thanked God because God gives us wisdom and power. That was encouraging to the people of Judah under Antiochus who read that. And it's encouraging to you and to me. We are not helpless. Even if you're beaten down and you feel depressed and you're fatigued and you're tired of fighting, the truth is that we are not helpless. The scripture was written in a time when horrible things, atrocities were being committed against people. And they read these words that, no, God deposes kings. No, God knows what happens in darkness. God drags everything into the light. It's all going to come out into the light. And God can give us wisdom and power, the ability to look around and see what's going on and to know, here's what I can do. And like family systems therapy, if we change, everything else must change. You will have a positive effect on your environment, whether it's the election or whether it's something personally that you're facing. If you're willing to change and grow and move from that helpless category into the wise category, you will have an effect on your environment. It cannot stay the same. It is powerless to stay the same when you decide to act because you have wisdom and power. I want to invite you to pray with me. And there may be those of us who have been beaten down so much, or who are so fatigued, or who feel such anxiety that it's hard for us to believe that we have wisdom and power. And you tell a story about an Olympic athlete, and it might even ring hollow. Sapola says, all the marbles rest on people who believe they're helpless, coming to see the truth that they're not helpless. And they can move into that wise quadrant where we can work for a win-win. We can stick up for ourselves while also helping other people win. Oh God, there's some of us who feel it very difficult to stand up for ourselves. Maybe it is a marriage relationship, maybe it is a work relationship, or some family thing, or we just find it difficult to confront people when they treat us in ways that we know we don't want to be treated that way. And we're tempted to feel helpless, but it's difficult for us to stand up for ourselves. God, may we hear those words that you have given us wisdom and power. We are worthy of dignity. We're worthy of respect. We are worthy of standing up. We are not helpless. We can be wise. Doesn't mean we turn into foolish people. Doesn't mean we turn into bandits. We can become wise and work for a win-win. For those of us who feel anxiety over our national politics, There are all kinds of things we can do. We can volunteer. You can go call at a phone bank. You can go door to door and get out the vote. There are all kinds of things we can do. We're not helpless. We can share on social media. You can talk about things. Talk about news stories you see. There are all kinds of things that we can do, God. We're not helpless. Most of all, we thank you that in a horrible, terrible time, in the 160s BC, for the people of Judah, they were able to look at Daniel and they could think, oh, we've seen this happen before. We can look around. We know what's going on. We have wisdom. And that wisdom comes from you. Not only do we have wisdom, but we have the power to do something about it. And we thank you, God, for that truth that could literally set us free. And in all kinds of ways. We thank you, God, that you give us wisdom and power. In Jesus' name. And everybody said,